Thank you very much. It's really my great pleasure to share my ongoing research with you all. It's actually, I'll actually just briefly introduce my research project a bit. It's actually an ethnographic research project on internationalization of higher education in the Chinese context. And the focus of my research is actually a group of students who are both international students and also Chinese students who study in the same EMI or English medium instruction programs in a top-rate university in Shanghai. And I adopted the ethnographic research by observing their courses, 4 different courses. 3 of them are actually disciplinary, compulsory, and elective courses throughout 2 semesters. And one of them is actually the cross-cultural communication course, which is also an elective in the whole program. And I also had in-depth interview with the students concerning their experiences and motivations for learning in China, and also their prospective life trajectories after graduation. And also I analyzed the policy documents involved concerning internationalization of higher education and also intercultural communication in both the Chinese and Asian and also the European and the US context, in order to understand the overall picture of what is going on in the current historical juncture when China is also competing with the US and also other Asian countries to attract international talents for future development. So this specific talk will actually focus on students' intercultural experiences when they study and live in Shanghai. Some brief introduction to internationalization of higher education in the Chinese context now. According to the statistics released by the International Institute of International Education in 2018, there are over 489,200 international students bound for China for study. So the total number has reached number 3 in the world and number 1 in Asia. So China has actually undergone the whole process of transiting from an sending country of international students to universities in Anglophone countries to one that receive lots of international students all around the world. So
number 1 and 2?
Number 1 should be US. I'm not sure about number 2. Number 2 should be UK. Yeah, not. Yeah. So why internationalization? The previous study in Anglophone countries, usually they will actually talk about the neoliberalism, the impact of the marketization of higher education that can actually motivate lots of universities to attract international students in order to earn more money. So that's the main income for those universities, and a revenue booming kind of industry. And in the Chinese context is entirely different. So the main purpose is actually to fulfill a diplomatic mission of the whole country. So what you need to do is actually to strengthen the ties with previously the socialist camp around the world, to attract allies from the third world countries in the 1950s and 1960s. And after the reform and opening up in 1978, it turned out to be that we are actually joining the overall global competition for international students. And now the purpose is actually to show that even if we have been perceived as a socialist country, we still have something that you can understand beyond the political ideology division in between the socialism and capitalism. So what they do is actually they attract all those international students and show them what is really look like by living and studying in China. And gradually, as the hypothesis will actually go, that they will actually develop a kind of very friendly image about China, and they will actually develop an emotional tie to this country, and that will actually be the so-called soft power of China. After they go back to their own country or work somewhere, they will actually have a more personal connection with the country. So that's the main point of attracting all those international students. And the other point is actually we have lots of so-called educational projects to develop higher education in China. And the latest one that has been released in 2017 is called the Double World Class Project, which means that we are actually trying very hard to promote the ranking of Chinese universities in the different types of global ranking systems. So the ranking system will actually determine what kind of funding you will actually get from the central government. So now we have got 42 universities listed on this double world-class project. So double world-class refers to a world-class university together with world-class disciplines. So even if you are not only one of the world-class university listed kind of university, if you have a very strong discipline, you can also get lots of funding from the central government in order to further strengthen the disciplinary strength in the global ranking, even if the university is not really a strong one. So being motivated by these two major drives, we have got the development of English medium instruction master's degree programs in China, so which is also one of the major strategies among Asian universities, because usually the educational resources that have been allocated around the world is definitely not really equal. So for those who want to pursue undergraduate education overseas, they will still consider Anglophone universities as the priority choice. And then for the masters, they might actually diverse their priority list a bit. And then China, if we give them lots of scholarship, and also we have quite a number of world competitive universities there, and then probably they will actually come. So that's a major momentum behind developing the EMI programs. So the focus here is actually intercultural communication, how it has been framed by the national and institutional policies, and also how it has been experienced by the students on campus. So the previous study tend to focus on either these two different dimensions. So at the institutional level, we have lots of research concerning how the structural diversity itself, which means that the student body composition, even if it's entirely diverse, you have actually a small UN in your classroom. It does not only mean that they will have intercultural communication in between each other. So lots of research have actually proved that even if you have students from different parts of the world on campus, they won't even talk to each other. They will still stick to their own cultural or their own country, their own peers from the same nationality or based on their language family. So that's the very commonsensical experience for most of the international students. And also in textbooks on intercultural communication, they have also studied all those different textbooks circulating in the UK and also in the US. What they found is actually mostly they use the nation-bound, the so-called big culture, as a way to tell students what to do. So the most salient ones in the Chinese cross-cultural communication textbooks is rather similar to that one. Usually they will actually give case studies about how the Chinese delegates visit US or UK companies where the government sectors and how they should actually negotiate their stances. So the essentialist understanding of culture still reign in all those institutional practices. And some other research studies have actually pointed out that extracurricular activities and also tutoring services, together with the other social resources, just like Chinese students, when they study in the UK, they tend to use the church as a very important place to socialize with people with multiple cultural backgrounds, instead of use the university as a very important channel. So emotional bonding turned out to be more important than just a space with lots of diverse student population. And at the interpersonal level, we have 3 strands of research based on their different research paradigms and also research focus. The first strand is actually a social psychological paradigm, which usually will actually adopt the cultural shock or cultural contact hypothesis to study how students will actually psychologically adapt to the new learning environment in a new country. So the basic underlying assumption is how primarily they study Asian students because that's the largest group of students, international students in these contexts. So the underlying assumption is that those students need to adapt to the new environment. And also the question hand-on or focus on how well or how badly they adapt to the new environment. And the essentialist view on culture has also been the basic underlying assumption involved. So it usually refers to how the prescribed features can actually help you to negotiate and understand the new culture based on the existing paradigm that you have got. Confucianism turned out to be a huge challenge in this kind of research to say that Asian students can only adapt because they subscribe to the Confucian culture, or they come from the Confucius cultural heritage circle. So that's the basic argument. And we have lots of critiques concerning this group of research. You need to recognize or acknowledge the internal diversity among the international student groups in order to understand what might be the key factors involved. And then we come to the second strand of research. We have the social constructionist paradigm. So it will actually try to analyze the intercultural identity formation, which means that we don't truly take the essentialist view of culture as something that you can take for granted. So now we come to the very interpersonal or very specifically personal journeys of entering a new cultural interface. So it has been defined, they define intercultural identity as an open-ended, adaptive, and transformative self-other orientation. And the multi-factors turn out to be the main conclusion of this type of research. So they will actually say that the essentialist culture alone can only explain what is going on here. We have more like personality traits, your political economic background, and also your intercultural strategic resources, just like intercultural competence, can be something very much important here. And the third emergent paradigm is being referred to as the ecological paradigm, which borrow a lot from the ecologist studies about how the universe or how the society actually functions like an ecological system. So they do is actually they break down the dimensions we call the institutional dimension, national dimension, and the individual dimension. They try to take it as an ecological system and try to see the interplay in between all those different different dimensions and how it can actually help us to understand better what might be the relation in between. It actually echoes or resonates with the latest development trend in the field of language policy studies. So they try to say that we need to study the multi-site, multi-actor interplay instead of taking all those dimensions as very stratified, ordered kind of analytical categories that we can actually analyze one after the other. So the interplay turned out to be the priority. So we can actually see that both the argument actually converge in between the field of higher education research and that's in the field of intercultural communication. So the latest publications in language and intercultural communication start to use this kind of paradigm to study the bottom-up intercultural understanding in UK context, and also in Japan. We have similar kind of study that comes from researchers in higher education. So they also pointed out the weakness of the previous two paradigms. So one is actually they don't truly have a clear definition of intercultural or culture or relation or relationship or friendship. So all those terms have actually been used interchangeably, and they don't truly give a definition because the essentialist understanding of a culture has been taken for granted. So if you put a Chinese and then an international students together and then they talk, that's intercultural communication, but it might not only be the case. So the dominance of research also have a very narrow focus on the individual. So they tend to start from the individual level without talking about how the structure actually have an impact on the individual practices or the other way around. And then lack of attention to the intercultural relationship development located in a particular environment. So it has been taken for granted that the neoliberal ideology can actually reign everything. Because in the UK and also in the US system, or in most of the Anglophone universities, like in Australia, New Zealand, UK, US, and also Canada, the marketization of higher education turned out to be the leading discourse. So usually they will actually take it for granted that we address all those issues and see how students understand it. But in China, it turned out to be an entirely different kind of context. So we need to think about what might be the historical factors and also the historically sedimented discourses that co-shape the current status quo. So the research in the Chinese context tend to be very much scarce, and with the very limited number of research here, still do we have a division in between the institutional and also the interpersonal level of studies. So at the institutional level, they tend to trace back the historical evolution of all those different rationales and also the policies concerning the reception of international students, especially the transition from before and after the reform and opening up turned out to be the decisive historical period involved. And also China's role as one that tried to be the leader among the socialist countries, and then turned out to be one that can actually compete with most of the leading capitalist countries in the world, and just go beyond the Cold War ideology involved. And then a survey-based study tend to reach the conclusion that the satisfactory rate of international students vary in terms of the location they are based, and also the language proficiency and also the proximity of the home culture and the host culture, so still a very essentialist understanding. But usually they will actually reach the conclusion that we have very scarce interaction in between international students and home students, the Chinese students, which is also very much identical with my present case in hand. And then qualitative studies tend to draw on the social constructionist framework to talk about the cycle, which is also a leading kind of paradigm involved. Stress, adaptation, growth, and variation of the cycle, still a very dominant one. And then we have some ethnographic, or it's more like an in-depth interview-based research about how we can understand it. But they still stop at the home culture versus host culture kind of dichotomy. So I want to take discourse as a key notion here to see how these different dimensions play with each other in different ways. So discursive construction of culture and intercultural communication turn out to be the focus of my analysis. And here discourse is defined in line with James Paul Gee's Big D, or the discourse, which refer to almost different ways of speaking, doing, referring, and understanding the world. And to understand how those discourses are involved in structuring and shaping students' intercultural experiences in EMI master's degree programs. So that's the main research question. So in order to analyze the different definitions of culture, so here intercultural is, I have to explain a bit. Intercultural does not only mean that we have a very fluid, dynamic understanding of a culture as the taken for granted definition. It's more like an emphasis on the interpersonal level, lived experience level of analysis, instead of just giving it a very prescribed definition. So after I have collected data of different types, and then I try to review literature. So the interplaying between the data and then the literature give me three, which seems to be sort of like appropriate concepts to guide the analysis of the data. So the three ones are main concepts in the field of intercultural communication. So the first one is null or essentialist cultural dichotomies, which refer to the binary opposition in between two different cultural groups. Usually we'll actually give each group a number of stereotypical attributes to define what might be understood as one cultural group, a homogeneous cultural group. And the difference between null essentialist and essentialist is that essentialist kind of cultural dichotomy tend to impose a moral hierarchy in between two different cultural groups. It's like one is inferior and one is superior, based on certain kind of attributes. Like patriarchal order might not only be as good as gender egalitarian kind of stance in some of the societies. And then the culture, civilized versus salvage, can also be an example of the type. And then the new essentialist is very prevalent in discourse concerning the liberal multiculturalism, which generally refer to that each and every country have their own culture, but they need to be understood as equal to each other, which tend to neglect the power structure involved. So it has been critiqued on that point. So the second concept is othering, which is closely tied to the essentialist understanding of cultural dichotomies. So othering has been defined as a process of representing an individual or social group to render them distant, alien, or deviant. Usually it will actually hand on certain kind of differentiation paradigm. So previously we tend to say that race, class, or gender can be one dominant paradigm to establish an othering kind of action, social action. But here, nowadays, we gradually realize that the multi-sectional or intersectional othering is more prevalent, which means that we use multiple axes of differentiation to establish this kind of othering practice and legitimize this kind of practice. And then critical cosmopolitanism is entirely different from the previous two. So usually it has been taken as the most postmodern trend of understanding the fluid understanding of culture among individuals when they interact with each other. So it is actually grounded in studies concerning globalization. And the key features, we have different thinkers talk about it, but generally they share three major arguments when they say what might be counted as a qualified critical cosmopolitan mindset. So the first one is openness towards and care about global others, and critical self-reflexive inquiry about one's own epistemic assumptions and the development of epistemic virtues that help understand and appreciate divergent cultural experiences. And the third one is constant exploration and imagination about alternative discourses when articulating these experiences. So it might actually hand on different kind of, does not really rule out essentialist discourse concerning culture. So what has been made clear here is actually we're actually constantly exploring alternative discourses. Instead of take that we have all those two or three, that's enough. And open-mindedness towards the diversity is also a key point in that discourse. So a research context is one of the top-rated universities among one of the earliest universities in mainland China to receive international students. And it has over 7,000 international students on campus. Around 2,100 of them are full-time degree students. And there are over 25 EMI programs. So 4 in political sciences and international relations. That's the focus of my ethnographic project. And there are 2 major types of EMI programs. So one is actually specifically targeting international students. So it's actually exclusive to international students. The other is called the merging type, which means that it actually admits both Chinese and international students. So all of the programs in that department actually are mixed ones. So it includes both Chinese and international students, which is supposed to be a better site to foster interaction, intercultural interaction in between these 2 groups of students. So classroom observation, field notes, and in-depth student interview. I have 2 rounds of student interviews. This is actually the first round. You might actually not really be able to see it clearly. But the main point is here, we have Chinese students together with international students from East Asia, Southeast Asia, from Europe, and also from America, and also Canada. And also we have exchange students. They study together with the Chinese, with the full-time based in China students. And also we have one joint degree and one double degree program, also in the same department. So they will actually spend 1 year in France or in Sweden, and then in the second year they will actually come to China to study. And all of them actually study in the same kind of classroom because they share most of the curriculum. So And if you take a look at their previous degrees and exchange or working experiences, you can actually see it's not only the first time for them to come to a foreign country. And mostly they have actually got overseas learning experiences in Anglophone countries or in other parts of Asia. So the diversity of learning trajectories can also play a very decisive, can only say decisive, it's a very important role in shaping their current practice in the Chinese context. So the data analysis, I use multimodal discourse analysis because apart from the interview, I collected data on campus. It includes the promotional video for international student recruitment, linguistic landscapes on campus, which means that English and Chinese bilingual signage. We have lots of promotion concerning student activities on campus. That is also part of the data collection. And then WeChat public accounts. WeChat is a semi-public social media application, smartphone application. It can be used for group discussion. And lots of courses will actually use that as a platform for sharing messages, sharing reading materials on top of the learning system, educational learning system like Canvas or Blackboard or e-learning that has also been available. And students will actually use that for group work. So that's why I use that one. And also the main platforms for promotion of student activities are also embedded in this application. So it's very much important. And also course syllabi, assignments, and feedback that has been voluntarily shared by the instructors and also students. And national, municipal, institutional policies concerning the international student management affairs and EMI degree program development. So content analysis and intertextual analysis have actually been used. Intertextual analysis focused on the relation in between the current text and all those prior texts, which might actually be very much relevant. The discussion will actually focus on the institutional level cultural dichotomies of different types that have been established by different types of discourses, and then interpersonal othering that has been experienced by the students, and also the critical cosmopolitan mindset that have also been reported by some of the student informants. But the analysis will not only say that, because it's actually analysis at the institutional level, I will also include or try to construct certain kind of dialogue in between the student informant's comment or response to this kind of practice, as they are actively engaged in this kind of promotional discourse construction at the institutional level, and see how they actually react and how they comment on this kind of experience. So sort of like a way to transcend the very structured analysis of each and every dimension. So the first institutional discourse is a promotional video that has been produced last year to attract international students. So the genre varies from one university to the other. If you go for Peking U or Tsinghua University, you could actually see that they use the dean of the postgraduate school as a person to introduce what is going on in the university. And then we chose a few international students to talk about their experience. But they borrow a lot from the national agenda discourse to introduce. But here we have a university in Shanghai. So Shanghai is not only competing with Beijing as a political center. We have a more bottom-up, everyday leisure and petit bourgeoisie kind of taste experience. So what we do is actually to ask international students. They chose about 5 international students to talk about their experience in Shanghai and on campus. They will comment about the leisure life on campus. They have cute cats and everything. And then we have got some comment about the city itself. That's quoted here. So the student one actually said, I was so surprised that the city can be so Western. And we show the image of the Bund. The Bund is actually the colonial legacy along the Huangpu River, which will actually go to the sea. So on both sides, one side is actually the Oriental Pearl, which is the modern Shanghai after the reform and opening up. And the other side is all those colonial architecture, semi-colonial architecture that have been left by most of the banks, foreign banks, in the early 1920s. So, and then that's the western part. At the same time, holds so much the Chinese heritage. And then we have the Yuyuan Garden and the Jing'an Temple, the Buddhist temple, together with an ancient Chinese garden. And Shanghai works cashless, so everyone pays on WeChat or on Alipay, and a student talking to the camera. And then a second student continues. When I first came here, I heard about the 4 inventions of China, and a student talking to the camera. But this, like the 4 new inventions, just the other day I was riding my OFO bike, which is a public used bike. And I was using my headphone that I got from Taobao. So actuality footage of this student riding a bicycle on campus. And when I got to a shopping mall near the campus, I used my phone to pay for some hot pot. I love hot pot. And that's the second student. And then the third student said, when my girlfriend here, I'm gonna spoil her with all those presents to decorate her into a proper Chinese lady, like umbrella with a fan and silk scarf on her neck. And then a student talking to the camera. So you could actually see, if you go in depth into the discourse here, at first, my first intuition when I read the third one, I feel it's probably a kind of Orientalism discourse involved. But then I talked to professors in the sociology department and also those who are involved in the city branding discourse construction in Shanghai. You could actually see all those different promotional images in Shanghai. If they go to all those tourist sites, just like the Yuyuan Garden or the Bund, you could buy all those different things and you could see all those images. So it's part of the city branding discourse, so which draw on the historical legacy that has been part of Shanghai, just like the early 20th century semi-colonial legacy. And then what they do is actually they try to depoliticize what has been going on in that historical era. They won't actually say that it's part of the semi-colonial legacy. We'll actually say it's a combination. Shanghai is a city that combines the West and the East. So in Chinese, it's 中西合璧. So the combination of the East and West. And that's the most important, to make it a cosmopolitan city. So which is also kind of which also identical with the nostalgia discourse that is commonly used in city branding. And then we have got the 4 inventions of China. So at first I was not really that much familiar with the 4 inventions. Because there's a jumpy cut, if you see that the first student's comment does not really link with the second. If you don't truly know what they mentioned about the cashless pay with WeChat, and then the OFO bike is a public bicycle that you can use your WeChat to scan the QR code and then use it with very, very limited payment. And then we have got the Taobao, which is e-commerce. And the fourth one is actually the high-speed train in China, so which have been labeled as the 4 new inventions of China. It's part of the national discourse to promote that we have our own modernity. So that's the basic idea. So I interviewed a second student who is also part of the EMI program. So he said that what he was doing at the day of interview is actually he is quoting the People's Daily by saying that I know it's actually the 4 new inventions of China. And then at the editing stage, they cut the quotation part. So it turned out to be that the student is actually very much subscribing to the discussion that these are supposed to be the 4 new inventions in China. And then what the student said in the interview is actually, I feel that I won't actually say it's the invention of China. He said that it might actually be better if we say that it's a manifestation of modernity in the Chinese context. It can be multiple forms of modernity, but this is actually one type of it. So if you think about the critical cosmopolitan mindset, it's much more in line with that one, instead of just taking the East, West, or modern tradition kind of dichotomy involved. And then a promotional discourse concerning the cultural dichotomy can also be prevalent in all the signage on campus. So we have three major activities for international students. The first one is, here you can only see it clearly, it's actually the language buddy program. So the red letters here is actually for languages and friendship. So what they do is actually, the logic is, I teach you Chinese, you teach me English, and then we exchange our linguistic capital, and that's the purpose of having the language buddy. So, yeah, so, we have previous studies concerning why language buddy does not really work that much well, because one major reason is the international students will actually say it's too instrumental. When they approach me, they will actually say, can we practice English? So when they say practice, it turned out to be that we take English as something that we need to do exercise about, instead of we just use that to convey or exchange ideas, emotions, or whatever. So the instrumental kind of ideology embedded in this kind of activity turned out to be a barrier to foster more interaction between international students and local students. Another thing is actually, whenever you see someone with an European face or typical European face, they will actually take it for granted that they can actually speak English well, which is supposed to be not the case. If you go to the classroom, you can see most of the Chinese students who directly admitted to the master level from the same university, their academic English can be much better than some of the international students. So that could actually happen. And the second most important one is actually the International Cultural Festival. So it's still a very typical kind of nation-bound essentialist understanding of culture. So students with very different nationalities will actually have the national flag on top of a small stall, and they share the typical food and also try to promote some of the stereotypical kind of national mascots and things of the kind. And the third one is the so-called the talent contest, or the talent competition. 中外 means Chinese and foreign. So when they try to translate that into English, they will actually say Chinese and foreign students instead of Chinese and international students. You could see a very clear positionality there. It's actually from the Chinese perspective that we have Chinese students and then foreign students. And we have the W and E in between two different colors here. We have a line there. So this part is red, and this part is actually dark blue or gray. So W refers to the west, and E refers to the east. So the combination between the east and the west means we, right? But the thing is, in the actual practice, they have two different contests. So one for Chinese and one for international students. And also, if you think about the binary in between the west and the east, most, or at least over half of the students are actually from the Belt and Road, the One Belt and One Road kind of initiative in China, which means that they mostly from East Asia and Southeast Asia and also the Middle East. So it turned out to be, it's not only a very identical kind of reflection of what is going on campus. And then in the second year, which is the last year, they moved the whole promotion. This is actually from 2017. This is 2018. They moved the whole promotion onto the WeChat platform. So that's the promotional message they have got. So in the next 2 months, you will actually have the chance to see Korean boys performing cool hip hop, blonde girls singing affectionately, handsome black boys rapping, and feel passionate atmosphere just like a foreign talent show. Enjoy performances from all over the world, listen to beautiful singing of different types. So here is still a translation issue involved. So we have got the Chinese being written here, and then we translate the Chinese into English. And it's actually being done mostly by students. So it might actually be a result of their English capacity, and also because they don't truly take the positionality as a very important thing. They still translate 国外 as the foreign talent show. And then if you see all those stereotypical lexical collocation here, Korean hip hop is very popular in the Chinese pop culture, and then all those indexical words concerning your biophysical attributes can actually be understood as a way to understand the Chinese population versus the foreign population. But it is also politically incorrect by doing that, because in China, it's by taking the majority ethnic group, we call the Han people, as the stereotypical image of Chinese. If you think about the ethnic minorities, we still have Russian heritage, and also we have a Russian ethnic group population in China. They look exactly like the blonde. So we can only say it's a very fair representation of all those different cultural or ethnic groups in China, if you look at it. So in the classroom, because it's a political science project, so we have lots of discussion concerning the East Asian politics. So they cannot really avoid the issue of Confucianism. So the professors will actually try to introduce Confucianism as an important paradigm to explain the cultural or political systems in most of the East Asian countries. So what they do is actually they take it for granted that this can be one potential legitimate discourse to explain the political systems. But some students will actually challenge that. Probably in the case of South Korea, we have Buddhism and also Christianity and also Confucianism as prominent religious groups or religious traditions. So why we still take Confucianism as the only way to explain what is going on in Korea, in contemporary Korea, South Korea. And also they tend to sometimes draw on the cultural dichotomies that has been produced by the one leading German cartographer, who's also a Chinese, who has also got the Chinese origin. So you might actually have seen those before. The difference in between the West and East way of thinking. So here we have got the leadership, which looks like this. It's more like an egalitarian kind of practice in the Western context. And then we have got one leader who is supposed to be the center, and then we have all those surrounding him. So the power hierarchy has been prioritized here. So it has been taken as a way to explain the incremental and comprehensive economic reform in China versus in Russia. And then some of the Russian students will actually say, I want to actually categorize my country as one belong to the Western camp. And also this kind of reform models can also happen in some of the Western countries. So it does not only take culture as a dominant factor involved in shaping all those different reform models. So it might actually be very much identical with the previous research concerning the cross-cultural textbooks when they try to develop the curriculum. And the dichotomies reinforced by student management and recruitment policy can also be involved. So it's very typical in China that we have segregated arrangements for international student dormitory and domestic student dormitory, and also for classroom arrangements. So if we compare the 1985 and 2017 regulation on student residential arrangements, you could see a huge difference. In 2085, it's very much identical with the 1965. So during the Cultural Revolution, we still hold the position that we want to treat international students as almost like foreign delegates to China, because we're trying to build up the diplomatic image of the whole country by showing our courtesy to all those delegates. So what we do is actually that we have special funding arranged to provide them with very good catering and also residential facilities, which is definitely much, much better than the average Chinese monthly salary 5 times as much, I have to say. So why we have the regulations saying that though the relevant standards vary from those for foreign delegates and experts, because it happened in 1965, quite a few cases when international students complain or do not study well in the university, even if they have got all those very well distinguished kind of conditions provided. So that's why they want to say that we need to probably lower the standards a bit. And then in 2017, it's very identical with the 1996 one. We're trying to say that we provide them equal treatment in between international and local students. And we want to make sure that we can reinforce the regulation in real enactment. So to establish, refine, and publicize relevant management regulations. And international students can also apply for residential housing off campus. So that's the recent practice. But the thing is, because the policy does not really go in line with the actual enactment, so still most of the universities still will actually arrange residential areas differently. And in this university, we have dormitory arranged for Chinese students. 6 of the Chinese students will actually live in 1 dormitory room. Well, for international students, it's mostly single rooms. So the difference will actually have an impact on the interaction, because nowadays, if you think about Chinese students, they have lots of international experiences, and also they're exposed to the internet in whatever way. So you could actually see how critical thinking is also playing a role here. And because of the segregated residential areas, they have the International Affairs Office provided cultural activities and lecture series to international students, which have actually been required or being promoted by the central government. So the purpose is actually to let international students to be exclusive experiencers of China. Then they need to know something about China. So they organize this actually dumpling making activity, dragon boat race, knowledge tests on Chinese ancient civilization, traditional Chinese craftsman workshop, and paper cutting and pottery experience workshop, and historical heritage tourism excursions in and around Shanghai. So you could actually see it's very identical with the Chinese textbooks on how to understand China for international students. So what we do is very much like we try to trace way to the time of a hypothetical virginity. So China is not really have any kind of interaction with the modern lifestyle, which can be prevalent everywhere, anywhere in the world. And also we are free from the influence from the West in whatever way. So without being able to tolerate to any kind of evidence of foreignness, so we try to promote what has been literally reconstructed historical legacy, which might not even be identical with the original ones. And why do we have all these lecture series and activities? If we go back to the national policy in 2014, we have a line saying that we have to improve cultural opening as part of the legacy of reform and opening up. And the following lines: expand international cultural exchanges, strengthen the international curriculum capacity and the international discourse system, and promote Chinese culture around the world. So they do is actually they further elaborate on the last 2 lines, promote Chinese culture and international discourse system by developing the China discourse. So we have got China practices, China path, China stories, China voices, China discourse that have been promoted through the China Daily. We have a special section on China experience that have been told by international students or internationals working in China. And also China migrants to other places, they also promote this kind of practice. And this kind of lectures, together with the cultural activities, are part of the momentum to promote the China discourse. And when I interview the students, usually they will actually report that they don't truly have much interaction with Chinese students, which might actually be a reason, might actually have a certain kind of reason inbuilt in the whole system. Well, at the same time, they tend to believe that the bottom-up natural encounter can actually play a better role to foster interaction in between students of varied types. So Lucy is a student from the UK, and she has been in China for 3 years when I interviewed her. So I think that interaction that tend to happen from the bottom up. Or certainly, like, I don't feel any kind of a national or institutional policy has ever helped me to interact with Chinese students. Their activities are more like organized fun, whereas like most foreign students who will get together will set up time and place, like hang out. So she mentioned specifically about the dumpling making. She said that we can actually simply make dumpling or go to a local restaurant to have dumpling. So why do we need to have an organized activity to do that? So it's more like the activities tend to position students as decontextualized from what is going on around them. So that is the major issue involved. So we have quite a few instances of othering that has been reported by the students. So I interviewed 18 students in the first round interview without saying that it's actually about intercultural. So I asked questions concerning almost every different aspects concerning their experience in China. So only 3 of them mentioned about their interaction with the Chinese students. And then I tried to do a snowball interview method, sampling another 6 students, 3 Chinese and 3 international students, to see how they managed to do that. So among those who don't really have much interaction, they will actually give different types of reasons for not really doing that. So Dan is a Chinese student who studied in the same program, and he graduated from the same university as an undergrad in the same major. And he said that, to be frank, Chinese students directly admitted into the EMI master's programs are outstanding on average. They referred to the international students. They went through simple procedures of application and got admitted without meeting up similar high academic standards. I understand that's because our university wants to increase its level of internationalization. But when they came here, they made me feel that we arrived at China, a developing country, a place where access to the internet is restricted. We who came from the free world will show you how we live, what our world looks like, you know. That's the impression they gave me. Such a sense of privilege is ingrained. So usually the first few conversations, when they interact with each other, they will mention about how to get a VPN in China. And the message itself is a very common one, because some of the Chinese students will actually do the same thing. The attitude itself turned out to be an issue in hand. And also it's very much related to the national policy for lower the threshold for admission of international students in the Chinese context. And language also played a role. Because it's an EMI program, and we have academic English as required kind of practice on campus. For those students who don't really have EMI experiences in their undergraduate education or exchange experiences, especially for those from East Asian countries, like Rem is actually from Thailand. And he said that even though my English is fluent, I think I can talk more with Asians. I feel more comfortable with Asians. When I talk in Thai, I'm really sarcastic and funny. When I talk in English, I don't have that kind of skills. Some of my international friends are really academic, but I can't talk that much academically. When I talk to my Thai friends, some of them can talk about politics too. Even though I might have a hard time finding the words, it's my mother tongue. So it's easier to express how I think about the issue. So what kind of things you can talk about can also prohibit what kind of experience you will actually got from the intercultural exchange. And he further commented about the preference of Chinese students. They tend to, according to him, Chinese students tend to talk to Western students more, probably because their English is better than his. So that's actually an imagination, because Chinese students, they basically don't talk to international students either. So that's the issue. And international students have their own bubble. It happens everywhere. If you share more cultural commonality, you will naturally form a clique very quickly. And the structure does not encourage such interaction between international and local Chinese students. It's not organic. You have to pursue it yourself. We differ in terms of lifestyle and teaching style. This is actually a comment from an American student. So what he's referring to is actually Western students tend to go to pubs and clubs after taking the courses at night. So, but for some of the Asian students, they tend to go to cafes, restaurants, and library for study. So that's the lifestyle part. And then the teaching style is also in the kind of imagination. He felt that probably the Chinese medium instruction and English medium instruction can be entirely different kind of teaching style, which is not really that much true. So, but then we still have some of the cases that can be taken as the self-cultivated orientation towards critical cosmopolitanism, because I can only see that that's exactly critical cosmopolitanism, because I don't really have the real encounter or observation that can verify what is going on. But that's based on their report in the in-depth semi-structured interview. So one of them will actually say that David is from the United States. He's commenting on the traffic rules in Shanghai. So probably before June last year, the traffic rule goes like if you want to get across a road, the traffic light turned green for pedestrians, but then cars can still turn right or left when they try to get across, when pedestrians get across the road. So it turned out to be a huge trouble for him. And then after living in China for quite a while, he has got used to what is going on in China, and then felt that it's just adjusting to a new set of rules. It's not really wrong, but it's just different. So it does not only go for the existing paradigm from his previous experience as the criteria to judge what is going on here. And then for Qiping, who is a Chinese student, enrolled in the EMI program, he has lots of enthusiasm to interact with international students, both on and off campus, and also with visiting scholars of different types, because he felt that the Chinese mainstream imaginary concerning one's life path turned out to be very much homogeneous. So you need to complete certain kind of missions at a certain age. When to find a job, what kind of jobs you need to find, and when to get married, what kind of real estates you need to prepare in order to get married. So that's the social pressure that has been present in front of him by discussing with his classmates, Chinese classmates. And for him, the most important thing is actually international students showed me alternative ways of life and eased my anxiety of being different. Because he is not only subscribing to the neoliberal kind of self-improvement in preparation for competition in the future kind of mindset. So it turned out to be very much important to know different ways of understanding the world. We also have more neoliberal types who will actually say that if I can interact with Chinese students, I myself can actually get distinguished from other Western students because I have more cultural capital and social capital with me. These are my social ties. It can also be another type. So in conclusion, if we compare with the previous literature of the same type, you could actually see that it does not only help much to use the neoliberal concerns to explain what is going on in China. So what has been going on or shaped the intercultural communication in the Chinese context has more to do with the range of national and municipal discourses specific to the IHE in the Chinese context. And those discourses can actually hover over two major issues. One is actually to strengthen China's soft power. So China discourse comes together with the institutional level centralized model of internationalization to put all this China discourse into practice and develop different activities to promote the China discourse can actually go with the line about promoting or strengthening China's soft power in contemporary geopolitics. And then the other discourse is actually the modernization discourse that has been historically inbuilt in most of the Asian societies' development. So from the very beginning of attracting or receiving international students, the most important thing to show our hospitality is to show that we are not really far away or far behind the American or other successful capitalist social imaginary. So we want to show that we have good conditions, living conditions and catering conditions, because we are also sort of like developed even among the third world countries. So this kind of discourse is still at play in contemporary institutional management and regulation. So I think that's the main conclusion. And a few policy implications. So one is actually you need to bring in more equality between the international and Chinese students. They are still renovating the student dormitory for Chinese students, so probably it will actually be on the way. And the second thing is actually you need to be able to create more campus space, just like once on campus here. You have lots of open space for discussion, for talk. Spontaneous interaction can be fostered in this way. And also we need to have more critical pedagogy concerning what can be understood as culture. So we need to have collaboration in between the discipline-specific instructors and those cross-cultural or intercultural experts in order to unpack or destabilize the essentialist understanding of culture imbued in the disciplinary knowledge. So knowledge politics can also play a very important role here. So that's the conclusion. Thank you very much.